Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Turning Point. Today, we have one of my favorite people with us. T.Thomason is a singer-songwriter you may recognize from CTV's reality music series, The Launch, and he recently released a new single featuring Sarah McLachlan. That is just the most recent in a very long list of accomplishments, but don't worry, we're definitely going to talk about that one. But of course, we have to start with the Turning Point. Thank you so much for being here today, T.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
I should mention, too, that you're actually joining us from Nova Scotia, which is kind of fitting because that's where you and I met for the first time at CTV Atlantic.
Yes, absolutely. It's a bit of a full circle moment
It
right now
really
back in
is.
Nova Scotia.
Yeah. And it's
Mhm.
funny, we talked obviously earlier this week, and I don't think I realized until then we've kind of been on these like parallel paths. Like we were both in
Mhm.
Nova Scotia, then we both ended up in Toronto. That's when we saw each other again. Actually, I was that was when you were on the launch. I was at your
Mhm.
morning,
Mhm.
and now here we are. So how does it feel to be home right now, like especially during this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky. Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing, just like lucky, and I think there's definitely moments of feeling like just those big questions about like how long is this gonna last? Is this it? Like, do I just live here now? Like, what is happening? Um, but I'm trying to kind of avoid those questions and just really like be appreciative of where I am at the moment because it feels like the right place to be. So that's good.
That's great. It's so nice that you were able to get back. I think, a lot of people are really enjoying time with their families right now, and
Hmm.
it's hard not being able to make those plans for the future, but I'm glad you are enjoying some downtime with your family.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I really appreciate you making time for me. It's funny. We had a chat earlier in the week, like I was saying, and I was so curious about what you would say your turning point is. Whether it might be hard to choose one, I kind of had a few ideas. But actually, I feel like when I asked you, it was very clear to you that this turning point, your biggest turning point, was when you decided to leave university and decide to pursue music full time. So take me back to that time. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's funny. Like there are so many important moments. It's hard to narrow it down to one. But if we were really gonna be like, where did it all start? I do feel like that is kind of the point. Um, Yeah, and I had just moved to Toronto from this little town in Nova Scotia called Antigonish. I was going to U of T for first year, and I had been doing music for several years. I had put out a couple albums at that point, and I knew that I wanted to do music, and I didn't really know why I was going to university, but I kind of felt like my parents wanted me to, so I should. And to this day, they're still like, "We did not care if you went. Like, we don't know why you felt that way." But anyway, at the time, I felt like they wanted me to go, and so s- U of T was the only school that I could find that had a program that was focused on sexual diversity studies. And I was sort of like, okay, if I have to go to university, I'm gonna study queer people. Like that's it. Like I'm not gonna do anything else. Um, Anyway, and I was just kind of at the point, I think I lasted 2 months and I was barely ever in class, and I was always skipping class to write songs or to hang out with the friends I was making, and I just, I think the major point for me was I had this astronomy class that I told you about, and, everybody called it rocks for jocks because it was so easy,
Yep, I
supposedly.
I took that class too.
Yeah, and so the first exam in that class came around and I kind of studied, but like, whatever, didn't really, but kind of did. And I got a 75 and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I didn't even really study that hard and this is pretty good. So then the next exam came around and I was like, okay, I'm going to actually apply myself and maybe I'll do even better. And when I got the results of that second exam, I got a 55 and I was like, whoa, what happened? I studied way harder for this one. And I went back and I had actually calculated my first mark incorrectly, and I'd actually failed the first exam.
Oh,
So I
no.
did I did do better the second time. But I remember I was sitting in Robarts in that big library, that big U of T library when I realized this, and I was just like, yeah, like never mind, I'm not doing this. Like, I can't even calculate my grades. This is not where I'm supposed to be. And I went to visit my dad, who was working in Ottawa that weekend. I kind of dropped everything and was like, oh my God, I'm having a quarter life crisis. I need to come see you. And he was like, just drop out. And I didn't expect him to say that. I kind of thought he would say, you need to finish the first year and then you don't have to go back or something. But he was like, "You're wasting our money, like, just leave, like, if you don't wanna be there." So, um, yeah, that was when my mom had a bit of a harder time with it, and she kinda said to me, "If you're not gonna do this, you really have to apply yourself to music, and it's not a joke, and it's a lot of work to be a freelancer. You can't expect, that you're just gonna get signed to some label and everything's gonna be taken care of. Like, to be an independent artist is a really, tough life." And both my parents are actors and independent artists, so they know that. And, that was when I kind of had to make that decision to be like, "Okay, like, I'm not gonna rely on, having a manager," which I had, and I continued to have for a while after that, but I was like, "I really need to, look at this as a career and a business and make sure that I'm setting myself up for success." And up until that point, I had been kind of just having fun, and I still do have a lot of fun, but, yeah, it was sort of that growing up moment.
It's interesting because I think, a lot of us go through this phase, especially at that age when we're making these decisions about college and university, where you do feel like that external pressure, even if no one actually says to you, you
Mhm.
have to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a lot of pressure to figure out what you want to do with your life, and for a lot of, I think the kind of direct trajectory. So a lot of us feel is to go to school. So I totally get that pressure, but I love that that was your dad's reaction was, you're not happy, it's a waste of money, just drop out. Like, that must have felt like a relief to have that support.
Yeah, it was. And, yeah, it's funny. I feel like my parents have come through for me in a lot of moments in my life, and it is just that relief, I've always I'm so grateful to them because there have been moments in my life where I feel like I have to tell them really hard things, or I have to share things that, are scary or whatever, and they're always, you know, pretty much every time I can think of, they've always been so quick to immediately just, like, say, like, "It's okay." So you get that immediate relief, and then they're like, "Just so you know, like, it's okay, so just relax and calm down, and now we can make a plan and figure it out, but right off the bat, like, it's fine." So I'm grateful to them for that because you can really tie yourself up in knots about a lot of things if you feel like, you're not gonna have that support.
Absolutely, you're so right. I know you mentioned this, that you were no stranger to music. Obviously, at this point, you had been dropping albums since you were 14 years old. So even though you made this decision to leave, you had obviously the experience and this background in music to back it up. But you did mention, there was kind of this added layer of pressure this time around because you didn't have the manager. You were a little bit more on your own and more responsible for, especially that funding and financial kind of aspect of it. So how did you approach that? Even though the industry was familiar, there it was sort of a new path in a way for you.
Mhm. Yeah. I did still have a manager when I dropped out of university, but it was sort of more that, like, I think I had been really relying on them to just, like, do everything for me because at that point I had just turned 18, and, I was just a kid for, like, so much of my early career, and so I think kinda my mom's point was, like, "You can't just rely on this team that's around you to just know everything, do everything. You have to take responsibility for knowing about your finances, you have to know about, different opportunities that are out there, like, as much as you do have this team." And I did end up, like, parting ways with that team down the road, but, at that time, she's like, as much as you have this team and that's great, like, no one's gonna look out for you as much as you're gonna look out for yourself, and you have to take that on. You can't just, like, take a back seat in your own career," which is sort of what had been, like, I don't know, I had been so young, like, everybody's doing things for you, and you're kinda just showing up and playing, and it's, like, enough that you're young and talented and, um, like older maybe seeming than you are. It's like enough to just show up and be that person, but then at a certain point when you get to a certain age, like that's great, but you also now you need to actually be an adult and like step into those roles so that you know what's happening around you. So that was sort of my approach, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what you described there is, I think, an education in itself. You know, you basically had to learn the business side of this industry, and you did that very quickly. So that was 2012. You worked
Mhm.
on a new album starting then and
Mhm.
released it in 2014. So
Mhm.
2 year in 2 years, you created and released a new album. Learned so much about the business side of the industry. And then you get this, like, incredible news that you're going to be going on tour with Collective Soul, which, by the way,
Yeah.
on our first call, you casually mentioned that you went on tour with them. But what was that moment like when you found out this was happening?
Well, it was really cool. It was actually kind of funny. Like I, you know, I was living in this apartment in Toronto. I was living with roommates and my manager called me and was like, "Do you want to do this? Do you want to go on tour?" And I was so excited because it was I think a 2 month sorry, no, a 2 week tour or something or maybe a month long tour, but it was cross Canada and it was opening direct support. And like I I'm not gonna lie, like, I had to look up Collective Soul because like, they're a little bit before my time,
Right.
but of course, like, when I looked them up, I knew, "Heaven let your light shine down, na na na
Yes.
na 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 na." So, that was really cool, and I was just stoked, like, I had been playing for a long time, like you said, like, since I was 14 and whatever, but it was a always sort of on the weekends when you weren't in school or whatever, and then since being out of high school, moving to Toronto, I had really just been working on the album and I hadn't really like been in touring mode. So this was sort of my first like extended period of time on the road with shows back to back. And that was really exciting. That's to this day, that's like what I want to do. So, those opportunities are always awesome.
Oh, yeah, what an amazing experience. And in that moment, like, just kind of going back to your turning point for a minute,
Mhm,
less or about 2 years after making that decision to leave, you're on this tour.
mhm.
Was that a moment where you knew you had made the right decision?
Oh, yeah. I think so. I think I knew I made the right decision as soon as, like, it happened. I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, thank God." Like, I do not wanna I just like,
No
being
more
kind of
rocks for jocks.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I was, like, looking at I think I was the first of my friend group to drop out, and there was a couple other people who ended up dropping out, but just being out of it and watching these, like, young people kind of toil in this setting that they didn't wanna be in and, like, that they hated and contributed so much, I think, like, I know a lot of people party and all that kinda stuff, like, in university and especially in first year, but I think, like, sometimes that unhappiness and that stress and being in the wrong place really can contribute to people, like, using substances in a way that's not just about having
Mm.
fun, and I felt like I had kind of experienced that, and then I kind of was able to get out of it a little bit, and then I watched it go on with some people in my friend group, and I was like, "Wow, I'm really glad that I'm I got out," like, you know?
No kidding. Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious just in in looking at what you've done since then, and that sense of relief that you felt, like you said immediately. It was
Mhm,
obviously the right decision. So 2014 was the year you went on tour with Collective Soul,
mhm.
and this was a really big year for you because after that tour, you were back in Toronto, and this really marked another turning point, more in your personal life. So tell us about that.
Mhm, yeah, yeah, after the tour, I was back in Toronto and, we were it was that was a spring tour and I was kinda heading into the summer and, I woke up in the middle of the night and I'd had this dream, um, that really, like, threw me off and just really shook me, and I woke up in the middle of the night and had been dreaming that I was just walking down this long hallway with all these different doors and it was dark and there was just this like very loud voice kind of yelling at me, and I woke up and was in a full body sweat and just realized that I'd had a dream kind of telling me that I had to transition. because the first part of my career and the first part of my life was all under a different name, and it was all as like a young woman. And so I woke up and had this dream, and it didn't really surprise me because this had sort of been a thing, in my earlier life, in my childhood. And I think people thought it was a phase, and you as a teenager, you kind of um, take on the role that you think you're supposed to play, and you try to conform and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I don't know what happened, but I think my subconscious was just like, okay, we're done with this, and you need a wake up call. Um, and yeah, so I woke up from that dream, and sort of was really scared, and went back to sleep, and the next day kind of tried to pretend it didn't happen
Mhm.
and just move on. But I couldn't shake it. And spent that summer sort of un like it's funny how these things happen, and you can be on this path without really knowing, and like without even like it almost just feels like you're getting pulled along by something, and you don't
Mhm.
even like you but I found myself really like looking into like trans community more, queer community more, just gender nonconforming communities, and reading more about the different dynamics over the years, from butch and femme lesbian dynamics, and then through that to more of a understanding of trans identity, and just found that really fascinating. And I was working on I did this indie movie that summer, and I was playing the lead, and I was playing like a young girl, and there was this other girl who was playing my best friend, and we shared this gross little trailer for like 2 months filming this movie. Um, and as it went on, we got to know each other, and I felt comfortable to kind of ask her her opinion about some of this stuff. And I remember right at the end of shooting, I was like, "Do you just like know that you're a girl? Like, do you just know that?" And I really like expected her to say no, and she was like, "Yeah." And I was
Mm.
like, "Oh, okay, that's
Wow.
stressful because I don't feel that way." And so it
Mhm.
was just sort of these little conversations, and like feeling it out, and just trying to put the pieces together, but I hadn't really got to the point of wanting to share with anybody what I was sort of trying to put together. I don't think I even really knew. I just knew that I had something I needed to talk about. And yeah, it was a stressful time.
Yeah, I imagine. And it sounds like this was, even though it wasn't, necessarily a slow period of time for you, it sounds like it was maybe the first time in quite a while that you actually kind of had this time to maybe reflect and think about this because you had been so busy. You were performing quite a bit when you were
Mhm.
younger, then you went to university, then you
Mhm.
left and made this album, and of course
Mhm.
you're at an age as well at this point where you're thinking more about identity, I'm sure, in general. So after this conversation with your friend, then you, as you said, you kind of continued to read, to explore, and then when did you kind of start talking to other people who were close to you about being a trans?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that fall, I was starting to get to know a group of people who lived outside of Toronto, and I had kind of developed this new friend group that was sort of separate from my friend group in Toronto. And I also went to New York for the month of September and was playing shows, but I was sort of in this place where there was just new people around me who didn't know me. And I think through those groups, those were the first sort of people that I started to be a little bit more open with about wanting to explore this stuff, and particularly the people back in Canada, just in the small town just outside Toronto. That was the first group where I was like, I think this might be a thing, and they were sort of like, "Yeah, we know." Like, um, and they had already had a few, like there was already friends of theirs in their friend group who were non-binary or who were trans, and so it was not a weird thing, and it was very they were totally cool with like trying new pronouns or trying a new name. And it was nice to kind of have that isolated group, where I could just start trying things without too many questions or consequences that rippled out very far in my life.
Yeah, that's so beautiful that you had a community of people like that that you could feel safe and comfortable with. And like you said, just to try and see what felt right. Because after that album you released in 2014 under your last name, then the next 5 years were another really big period of change for you. Obviously, physically, as we were kind of just talking about there. But then you also started to work on another album during this time. And, 5 years working on an album, it must have felt, you must have poured your heart and soul into it. So, what was that period of time like as you were kind of going through all of these changes in your personal life and then also trying to work on something new in your professional life too?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I kind of publicly came out, and like I basically just stopped the album that I toured with Collective Soul was sort of in the middle of its life when this stuff started to come up, and I started to just find it incredibly difficult to play those songs and be that person and show up on stage as that person. So I basically just like killed that album in the middle of its cycle, which was really hard. I think, that was the biggest album. I had a really great team around me. I had, people invested financially in that album and, and beyond, and just all the energy that people had invested. So it was like a hard decision, but it
Yeah.
was kind of just one of those things that it's just you can't there's no point in like continuing in that situation. And then after that I just took a break, and I didn't really know how to do music because I didn't know who to show up as, if I was going to play shows, or what name to put on bills, because again, this wasn't public information at this point. And so I just took a bunch of time off and was working at this crisis counseling center in Toronto, which was like now that I think about it, I'm like, that was to be going through your own thing and then to be going to work every day and dealing with other people's things. It's like
Wow.
wasn't really any downtime. But through that time I was still in the studio, and my bass player Dave Henriquez, who came on the Collective Soul tour with me, while we were on that tour, we would always share hotel rooms because he was the only person in the band who didn't snore. So I would always want to be in
Very
his
important to
room.
have that person on tour. Yep.
Yes, and he is a great producer and engineer, and so he would hear these little songs that were kind of in the works on that tour, and said, we should get together when we get back and try putting some of those down. And so we did that, and yeah, so through that first little break, we were working on all these songs. We put out a little EP together, which was my first release under my new name, but we were also kind of simultaneously working on this album. It was basically like a continuation of the EP, or songs that didn't make it onto the EP. And yeah, and that ended up turning into like a 6-year working relationship, like with Dave through that time. And I think I was really good that I had that, because there would be days when, I would go to my crisis counseling job or whatever. And I remember this one day we had an intern and from Ryerson or something, who was doing their, internship with us. And she sang and she did little open mics and stuff. And she found out that I also played music, and she was like so surprised and excited and was like, "Oh my God, you play music? Like that's so great. Like we can talk about that." And I was like, it was just, my ego was like really bruised, I think, by that. Like I was like, wow, like what is happening where right now I'm living a life where I'm meeting people and they don't know that I play music. Like they don't know that about me. That's not like at the center. But at the same time, I could go into the studio with Dave and like have that outlet and be working on it. So it was I think really important because it kept me connected. There were definitely like days in that time where like I just couldn't even look at my guitars because I just felt so guilty that I wasn't playing music, but I just couldn't at that time. Like I just couldn't show up, and like I didn't know who to be for the music at that time. So it was good to have a break.
One of the things I've always really admired about you in your interviews over the years is that you are just honest. And I think that's a hard thing to do because, a lot of the times we get for a lot of people, you feel like you should be doing something, like you were saying there, it's hard not to feel guilty when you make a decision that maybe not everyone supports, um, or that you feel like, oh, I should have done this or had this responsibility. But I think it's very commendable, and I think it sets such a good example that you chose to be true to yourself in this moment, even though it was hard,
Mm.
obviously, and it wasn't easy at times. And after, during this period also, there was another big moment for you when the launch came calling. So how did that
Mhm.
fit into this timeline here?
Yeah, totally. So, um when we put out this little EP called Sweet Baby, that was sort of when I was like, okay, like I'm quitting this crisis counseling center and I'm actually going to focus on music now. And by that time I had parted ways with my former management team. And so I was like fully alone and I was like, okay, I have to put out this EP by myself. I have no money. I don't know like, you know, uh what I'm doing really because I had, as much as I had stepped up a lot when I dropped out of university, I had always had that team. So this was really the kind of like, okay, like I don't know, I'm free falling and I'm like totally independent now. Um, so that was I kind of poured my focus into that, booking my shows around that, and Dave and I continued to record, and that EP helped me kind of get my feet under me and helped me figure out, new team members I wanted to work with and all that kind of thing. And by the time the launch sort of came along, we were sort of into the release cycle of the album. Um, and so we had finished this album. My parents had let me like use my university money to fund it. Um, and I was still like kind of on my own. But I had through the EP met a couple people to like start to fill out my team who I felt really comfortable with, and we were making plans for this album release, and we'd put out one single. The first single was Bliss in August of 2018, and then um, I was at a music conference and I saw this panel about the launch, and I had kind of seen the show the first season, and I thought, oh, it's kind of interesting, but also I am really skeptical of reality TV and I just don't know about that. And a couple people had said to me like, oh, you should apply, and I was like, maybe, but like I don't know if I want to be that reality TV guy. And then I went to this panel and there were so many people. Well, first of all, I was sitting in the lobby of the hotel and I was really tired, and my partner at the time was at home, and I was thinking like I'm just gonna leave and like go hang out with her because like I'm exhausted. And this guy walked into the lobby and his name was Fraser Hill, and he was a guy that I'd known through the music industry for just a long time, and he'd been supporting me, coming to shows or showcases at conferences or whatever like since I was 14, and we hadn't seen each other in years. And I stood up and was like, oh my god, like great to see you. How are you? What are you doing here? And we just had a little moment to reconnect, which was really nice. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to speak on this panel because I'm involved with the launch. And I was like, okay, like if you're involved with the launch, like I'm going to the panel and I want to know more about this. And so then I went, we talked some more. He came to my showcase of that festival, and then they said to me like, we really think you should apply. Um, so I did, and yeah, I'm so glad that I did. It was I wouldn't have applied though, I don't think, if I hadn't realized the people that were involved, because the people that were involved were really caring and, like well respected people in the music industry. It wasn't just, some TV show that didn't have any connections to the music industry. So yeah, it was nice that there was that like again that full circle kind of thing with it.
Absolutely, you're right. It wasn't a show just to kind of, about getting TV ratings. It
No.
genuinely was about developing talent.
Mhm.
I actually went back last night and I watched your performance of Hope at
Uh,
the end of the launch. I wanted to just remind myself of because I remember it just being such a powerful performance.
mm,
And it's interesting now hearing you, kind of talk about your whole journey to this point because that performance was so powerful and so full of emotion, and the song in itself is kind of an emotional journey,
Hmm.
and seeing your performance of it, you really feel that raw emotion. So now that I'm kind of
Hmm.
hearing about everything that led up to that moment, did it feel after those 5 years of really ups and downs? Did it feel like the kind of this culmination of all of that energy coming together and then ending with something really positive?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the people that were there, because I was allowed to have family, my parents flew in. I had really close friends there who had been through the whole thing, and it kind of felt like a movie moment, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, it was really great. And a lot of the in that performance, when I'm kind of, I think there's a couple moments where I'm like looking off to the side, and I'm looking right at my friends and family and singing to them. So, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I felt the same kind of rush of emotions watching it yesterday again as I did
Hmm.
the first time. I remember we had you on the morning show not long after that performance. It might have even been might have been like a day or two after, and
Yeah.
I remember us all just talking about how blown away we were. So that's really cool
Oh,
to know
thanks.
that. Now I'm gonna have to go back because I mean, the crowd, you can feel their energy and
Hmm.
how, they just like want to get up on, on stage with you. But I didn't realize your family was all there too. That's really cool. So after that, you were actually supposed to be on tour this year.
Yes, yeah.
Of that, and it's so this pandemic has been obviously hard on so
Yeah.
many of us, but especially the entertainment industry. So obviously you had to cancel that. And actually, when I saw that you were back in Nova Scotia, I thought, oh great, you must be getting some downtime, and at least if you can't be on tour, you're getting some time to relax. But you have actually been incredibly busy during this pandemic. You just dropped a new single, Bliss Part 2, featuring Sarah McLachlan. And I know you couldn't be in studio together with her like you had planned, but so how did this all even come together during a
Yeah.
pandemic?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all started with the launch. Like as you know, Sarah was one of the mentors on my episode, and the day after that episode aired, I got this text from a random like BC number, and it was like, "Hey T, it's Sarah M, your mentor. I just wanted to
Oh
tell
my
you,
gosh.
yeah."
Wow.
She was like, "I heard your song on the radio, and I'm so proud of you, and whatever." And I was like, how did you get my number, first of all? Like, how,
Wow.
like, what the hell? Yeah, it was so funny. And then we've just stayed in touch, and she's been super generous with her time. And when she hosted the Junos, I was playing at the conference that's Juno Fest, where they'll have up and coming bands showcase. And I told her I was going to be there, and she invited me to come and hang out and like be her guest backstage at the awards show with her friends and family and stuff. And it was just
So
really
cool.
cool. It was my first Junos, and it was like the best possible
Oh,
first
what an
Junos, I think.
experience.
Yeah, yeah. Dave and I went, which was really fun, and just hung out. And yeah, but then we just kind of kept in touch, and I got this idea about doing these reimaginings of singles from the album, and she was one of the first people I thought of. And especially with that song Bliss, to me it's such a special song, and I know that it's one that really has connected with a lot of the people that follow my music. And so I didn't want to I didn't want to take it anywhere that wasn't absolutely the perfect direction.
Hmm.
And to me, like, what's so special about that song is the kind of, I don't know, just the energy that it's about. It's about that like unconditional love, basically, whether whether it is about my family, but whether it is your biological family, your chosen family, whatever it is. And I definitely, in spending the brief amounts of time around Sarah that I have been able to spend, I felt like I saw that with her in general. She's such a loving and generous and grounded person, but even just with her relationships with her own friends, at the Junos, she had a group of friends with her. And when I spent a little bit of time with them, I realized that they had all been friends for like 30 years, and they all had kids about the same age that were all there together and who knew each other and grown up together. And I just was really struck by the fact that she had kept this group of people around her through all the, incredible things that she's experienced in her career. And I felt like that was the right energy to bring to that song. So I was super excited when she said yes.
Yeah, and I watched on YouTube where you can obviously hear the song, but also see this like beautiful animation that goes
Hmm.
along with it, and it really does. It's a musical story, and like you said about unconditional love. I was going to ask you if it was about your own family, so it
Oh
is.
yeah. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, for anyone who hasn't seen it, highly recommend. It's beautiful. So in terms of the
Mhm.
recording of that itself, how did you manage to do that
Yeah.
with her?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, because I was supposed to go to Vancouver and we were going to go into the studio together. And of course, that all didn't happen with the pandemic. But she, she was in Vancouver for a really short period of time at one point in the summer. And I wrote to her and was like, hey, do you think we could still do this? And so my producer Dave and I had to kind of get together a really rough demo because we didn't have anything, and she was only kind of going to have access to the studio for a short period of time. And so we got this rough demo together, and we were like, okay, listen, it's not going to sound like this, but we just need you to sing over it. This is the structure, but it's going to be better than this. So if you could just sing, and then we'll build the track around your voice. And that's what we did, which is totally the opposite of how we usually the vocals are the last thing to go on. But it was fun. It was a fun challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's something else that this pandemic has certainly turned a lot of things upside down. But that is in watching and listening, watching the video and listening to the song, I would
Mhm.
have never guessed. I mean, it all worked out so beautifully.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, the way it all meshed together. So
Thank you.
I would have never guessed that that it had kind of come together in this backwards way, but in a way that it seems kind of fitting
Yeah.
given
Yeah.
the state
Yeah.
that we're in right now. It seems kind of fitting that like things didn't go as planned, but they still
Mhm.
turned out beautifully. Hopefully that's a sign of what's going to happen when this is all over too.
Oh, that would be great. I mean, I think that's something that I feel like this time has been teaching me, and all these experiences of working with all the different collaborators that were on the part 2 project is like you can't control the world, you can't control other people. You have to let go and like trust the situations that you've gotten yourself into as much as possible, like, and hopefully they work out. And I think that's like sometimes I know we were talking about this. It's easy to get a certain picture of success in your head and really chase that and try to control that and all those things. And I think so many of the people that we admire, I just watched the Shawn Mendes documentary, but I think so many of the people we admire who we like look at and we wish we were, in that category, or we wish we were them or whatever. Like, I bet so many of those people would say that they could never have planned for those big moments or where they've ended up. And I try to remind myself of that. It's really hard, but I try to remember that like a lot of the greatest things could never have been planned.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I feel the same way. I know after our conversation the other day, I think we both realized like, hey, we actually personality-wise have have a lot in common,
Yeah.
and I think that's been one of the toughest things about this pandemic for me too. Is
Mhm.
just feeling like I'm not able to do the things I feel like I should be doing. But I think you're exactly right. It is such an important life lesson to learn that things don't always go as planned, but sometimes the end result of that is just better than you could have ever planned anyway. So it's good
Yes.
to be open.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, your part 2 project, I know it's been keeping you really busy even before the pandemic this year. There are
Mhm.
4 songs in total. The final one was Bliss Part 2, which we were
Mhm.
just talking about with Sarah McLachlan.
Mhm.
So these are all reimagined versions of songs from your self-titled album,
Mhm.
and each of them is a collaboration with a different artist. And this is sort of a unique approach
Mhm.
to kind of I think the words you used were kind of extending the life of this album that you had put so much into. So how
Yeah.
did this idea come about?
Yeah, well, the album came out in September 2019, and we were talking about this before, but nowadays it's sort of like the release strategy for albums is kind of flipped from how it used to be, which is where now you put almost the whole album out as a series of singles before you drop like the whole album. And once you do drop the whole album, it's kind of you got a little bit of time, but it's you're kind of on to the next thing, unless you're touring or you're a really huge artist or whatever. Um, and so I had done that, and I had put out some singles. I had dropped the album. I had kind of changed up my team at the very last minute before the album released. So there was a bit of a again, I was back in that situation where I felt like I was sort of like managing a lot of stuff myself. And I was slated to go to France like right after the album dropped to work on this other totally unrelated project. So I sort of was like, okay, like cool, like we did the singles, the album's out. I guess that's kind of it. Like I've got a couple European dates, but my team is a bit like decimated right now, and I don't know what's going to happen like in Canada, which is where I've been really working to like make sure this album is well received. And I had industry people kind of saying to me like, okay, well, what's next? Like if you want to grow your team again, like you got to provide new material and you got to like have a new direction. And I just felt super overwhelmed by that. And I was like, man, like I just worked for so long on this record, and how could it be over already? And so I was kind of brainstorming with a friend who works with me on my stuff, and they were saying, well, maybe you could do some remixes or something. And from that, I was like, yeah, I don't know about if I want to do remixes, like DJ remixes,
Mhm.
but yeah, I like this idea of like taking a look at these songs again and reimagining them, and that's where it kind of started. And it was just like we need to do something because this is not done, and through the process of making the album, I had worked with so many other people and I'd learned so much about collaborating. And I was like, that's the next chapter of this album is bringing that to light and like really paying tribute to these collaborators who have been or mentors who've been kind of behind the scenes and I haven't had a chance to do anything with, but their fingerprints are already all over the past couple of years of my career. And wouldn't it be great to have actually a piece of work that reflected that connection? So why don't we take it there? And yeah, it was really exciting to see it all come to life, like from this little idea that came up in a phone call.
No kidding, and, obviously this amazing experience to work with, all of these musicians who, like you said, have been mentors to you, and this is
Mm-hmm.
actually kind of a perfect segue into, one of the other projects that's been keeping you busy during this pandemic. You're also working on developing, a mentorship program to
Mm-hmm.
help the trans community in the music industry in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
know this is very close to your heart, so what inspired the idea for this?
Yeah, totally. Well, it came out of the seed of this idea came out of a conversation with my friend Ria, who's on Loser Part Two, with me, and who's been a really great friend and mentor all through the last several years of my career. Um, but we were just talking, and it was after Hope had come out and the launch and all that, and she said to me like, "Do you think that you're the first trans person to have had a song in the top 40 on Canadian radio?" And that just really kind of struck me, and I knew that she meant it as a really like positive thing to be proud of. Um, and it just kind of stuck me like in a weird way. Like it stuck with me in a weird way where I just was like, I don't even know if that is accurate, and I don't think that that is accurate, but the fact that it would be a question and that it could have been, like, accurate just sort of disturbed me, um, and I started thinking about, like, why is that? Why are we kind of in that period of time right now where we are still seeing, like, lots of spaces where there's no trans representation, so there's still those first times that kind of have to get broken or whatever. And as I was sort of moving forward after the launch, and kind of leaning towards doing a more pop thing with my music and trying to be in rooms with pop producers and pop writers, and those rooms are to get into certain rooms, it's like there's a lot of competition or there's a lot of kind of relationship building that has to go into getting into certain rooms. And even then, once I got into some of those rooms, I realized that I was the only person who was trans in those rooms. And, you kind of, I don't know, I just had not really thought about that. But once you're kind of sitting in those rooms trying to write songs that are gonna be honest and hopefully impact other people, and though they might not be, you're not necessarily trying to be explicit about a specific experience, it's sometimes really nice to have someone else in the room who just gets you, and you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to like say anything. And I always felt like that was missing, and there were, then of course there's the times where it not only is it missing, but there something happens and it's really awkward, or it's not appropriate, or it's whatever, it's ignorant. And that didn't happen too much, but it did happen a little bit, and I was just kind of over it. And I was kind of like, yeah, well, no wonder, like, there's no other trans, or suppose, like, it's harder to see, there's less trans representation because there's just so many barriers. And I've kind of had this whole other career where I wasn't trans, or I didn't know I was trans, and I wasn't working as a trans artist or whatever. So it allowed me to get to where I am. I've had these relationships that have been being built for years and years. And but for people who are starting from a place where their trans identity is like immediately part of their career or whatever, as much as I wish that that wasn't going to impact their trajectory, like sometimes it does, not with everybody. And I just was feeling really um depressed by that. And I was like, what can we do to like make this a little bit easier? And it was partly selfish because I was like, I want to know who is out there, like I want to create my own community. And yeah, so what can we do to make that happen?
I think, what you just said there, anytime you're, the first or the only, it's hard, and you have this very unique perspective of having seen this industry through both lenses, like you were saying there, so you kind of know the difference in
Mhm.
how you would be treated and how you would experience being
Mhm.
in, especially like being in some of these rooms.
Mhm.
So I think like what a great way to help others, first of all, and then like you said, also to kind of build this support community, for other members of the trans community. So
Mm.
you've now started with a survey, right?
Mhm.
That people can take, and to kind of figure out what the need is,
Yeah.
and then from there,
Yeah.
you're planning on building out the program.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's gonna be supported and partnership with Music Ontario and Music Publishers Canada. So, yeah, I'm really excited that they've kinda stepped up and they're like, "This is important to us. We wanna be part of it, but we wanna let, you know, the community kind of take the lead on what it actually looks like." I thought that was, like, a really really beautiful thing because I think self-determination is such a huge part of empowering a community. It's allowing us to make our own decisions about what we need. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, more to come on that, of course, for sure. I'm definitely going to be following that. I want to like kind of go back to your turning point into the beginning of the
Mhm.
interview for a minute because 2012 was that turning point, that decision to leave university to pursue music full time. I
Mhm.
don't think there's any question about whether it was the right decision. But as you look to the future, you're 26, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, you've done so much already, but what's next for you? What are you kind of hoping to do? And then you've
Mm.
already done more than most people do in a lifetime, but what do you hope to do in the next little while?
Oh, man. Uh, you know, I was just thinking about I just watched, like I said, I just watched the Shawn Mendes documentary, and I was like, "I need to set some goals." Like, I need to, whatever. But, I think right now my goal for myself is to just like relax and just kind of like do some work to peel apart who I am, you know, in terms of my career and that kind of thing, but then like who am I just as a person? Because I feel like I've been so kind of focused on my career and rebuilding it in the last couple of years, and it's really easy to kind of get all of your self-worth from that. Um, and that can feel really good on some days, but it can also feel like really bad on other days, and eventually you realize that you actually have no control over over it, which is scary. So I'm really happy with how things are right now, with where they have got to, and the little, pots that are boiling or whatever. But I'm also just like, you know what, like, time to do some work and just like learn how to relax and do other things and have other interests, and use that, hopefully, you know, to fuel whatever does become the next thing. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That downtime, and we're kind of in this. The world is sort of forcing us, especially as people who like to be busy and always like to be
Mhm.
thinking about what's next. So I think that's great, and I'm so glad you're home, that you kind of have the space to have this downtime. And I imagine there are going to be many more turning points. So I hope that we can
Yes.
check in again sometime. And thank you so much for making time for me today. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy our conversations.
Thank you. Congrats on this podcast. I can't wait to listen to all the other episodes.
Oh, thank you so much, T. For all of you listening and watching, you can find T. Thomason's music on Spotify, on YouTube. Definitely check out Bliss Part 2. Make sure you watch the video for that one. It was such an incredible, beautiful experience for me. So until next time, T, take good care of yourself, of your family, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. You too.